Marcus Cole had never been the hero type. He was not the strongest soldier in his unit. He was not the fastest. He was not the one commanders pointed to when they needed something done perfectly. He was just Marcus, a 26-year-old kid from a small town in Ohio who had joined the military because he had nothing else to do after his father died and his mother could not pay the bills anymore. He was average in almost every single way. Average height, average build, average scores at the academy. His commanding officer, Sergeant Briggs, had once written in his evaluation report, "Soldier Cole shows adequate performance, nothing exceptional to note." Marcus had read that report 3 times. Each time it stung a little less, or maybe he just got better at pretending it did not sting at all. But on the morning of September 14th, everything about Marcus Cole's average life changed forever. The war with the Varath had been going on for 2 years by then. Nobody had really wanted the war. It had started the way most wars start, with a misunderstanding that grew too big, too fast for anyone to stop it. A human exploration ship had accidentally entered Varath territory. The Varath had warned them to leave. The ship's communication system had been damaged, and the crew never received the warning. The Varath opened fire. The crew fought back. 7 humans died. 19 Varath died. And just like that, 2 civilizations that had never even properly met each other were suddenly at war. 2 years later, thousands were dead on both sides, and nobody could remember exactly what they were still fighting for. Marcus's unit, the 14th Infantry Division, had been stationed on Kepler 7, a cold, dark planet at the edge of Varath territory. Nothing grew there, nothing lived there naturally. It was just rocks and gray sky and freezing wind that cut through your armor like it was made of paper. The soldiers called it the grave, not because anyone had died there yet, but because it felt like the kind of place where things came to die. On September 14th, the Varath attacked at dawn. It happened fast, too fast. One moment, Marcus was sitting in the base, eating a protein bar that tasted like cardboard. The next moment, the alarm was screaming, and soldiers were running everywhere, and the sky outside was full of Varath dropships descending like black birds of prey. Marcus grabbed his rifle and ran outside with the rest of his unit. The ground was shaking. Explosions were going off in every direction. Smoke filled the air so thick he could barely see 3 feet in front of him. His commanding officer, Sergeant Briggs, was shouting orders through the radio. "Hold the eastern perimeter. Do not let them reach the communications tower." Marcus ran toward the eastern side with 6 other soldiers. They took cover behind a broken concrete wall and started firing at the advancing Varath warriors. The Varath were terrifying up close. They were massive. Most of them stood nearly 7 feet tall, with thick black bone plating covering their bodies like natural armor. Their movements were fast and precise. They did not run like humans run. They moved in short, powerful bursts, covering ground faster than anything that size had any right to move. Their weapons fired bolts of blue energy that punched clean holes through concrete walls like they were made of sand. Within 4 minutes, 3 of Marcus's 6 teammates were downed. Within 6 minutes, there were only 2 left, Marcus and a soldier named Torres. Torres grabbed Marcus's arm and pointed toward a gap in the smoke. "We need to fall back. There are too many of them." Marcus was about to agree. He was about to run. Every single sensible part of his brain was screaming at him to run. And then he saw it. Through the smoke, about 40 meters ahead, a young Varath soldier was surrounded by 4 human soldiers. The young Varath was barely fighting back. He looked injured, maybe 17 or 18 years old by Varath standards, small for his species, barely 6 feet, his bone plating cracked in 2 places. He was going to die in about 30 seconds. And behind that, standing between the young Varath and the rest of the battlefield, was the largest alien warrior Marcus had ever seen in his entire life. He was enormous, at least 7.5 feet tall. His bone plating was jet black and carved with deep markings,
battle markings, Marcus would later learn, earned over decades of war. He moved like a storm, controlled, powerful, inevitable. He had already killed 4 human soldiers in the last 2 minutes alone. Marcus had seen it happen. The alien warrior was not moving to attack. He was guarding, standing between the injured young Varath and every threat on that battlefield, protecting him. He is protecting someone, Marcus thought. Torres pulled his arm again. Cole, move, now! But Marcus could not stop watching the warrior. There was something in the way he moved, something that Marcus had never seen in 2 years of war. It was not rage. It was not bloodlust. It was pure, focused duty. This alien warrior was going to die on this battlefield, and he knew it, and he had chosen to die here, protecting someone he cared about. Marcus had never seen anything that brave in his entire life. And then one of the human soldiers flanking the young Varath raised his weapon toward the injured alien boy's head. Marcus moved before he even thought about it. He broke from cover. Torres screamed his name. Marcus was already running, not toward safety, not toward the retreat point, but directly toward the chaos ahead. He didn't have a plan. He didn't have a strategy. He just knew that he could not stand there and watch a teenager die, human or alien, while he hid behind a wall. He reached the flanking soldier in 5 seconds and tackled him hard to the ground. The shot went wide. The young Varath scrambled backward into the smoke, safe, at least for now. But the moment Marcus looked up, he realized what he had just done. The massive warrior had seen him. Those burning, coal-black eyes locked on Marcus from across the smoke and fire and chaos. For 1 full second, everything seemed to slow down. The noise faded. The explosions felt distant. It was just Marcus, on his knees in the dirt, and this enormous alien warrior staring at him from 40 feet away. Then the warrior charged. Marcus had exactly 1 second to react. He raised his rifle. His hands were shaking so badly he could barely hold it steady. The warrior was covering ground impossibly fast, 30 feet, 20 feet, 10 feet. Marcus pulled the trigger. The shot hit the warrior directly in the chest plate. The energy blast cracked through the black bone armor, and the warrior stumbled, 1 massive step forward, then another. Then he stopped. He looked down at the crack in his chest slowly. Then he looked back up at Marcus. Those burning, coal-black eyes stayed locked on Marcus's face for 3 full seconds. Then the warrior fell. The ground shook when he hit it. Marcus sat there on his knees in the dirt, rifle still raised, smoke swirling around him, the entire battlefield feeling quieter than it had a moment ago. His hands wouldn't stop shaking. His heart was pounding so hard he could feel it in his throat. Torres appeared beside him out of the smoke, grabbed his arm and pulled him up. "What was that? Are you insane? You could have died." Marcus looked down at the fallen warrior 1 more time. "He was protecting someone," Marcus said quietly. Torres stared at him. "He was the enemy." Marcus didn't answer. He let Torres pull him away from the battlefield, but he kept looking back over his shoulder at the warrior lying in the dirt, this enormous, powerful, brave creature who had died doing the one thing Marcus had never seen anyone do on this battlefield, choosing someone else over himself. Marcus did not sleep that night. He didn't know it yet, but in 3 days, everything was going to get a lot more complicated. 3 days passed. Marcus didn't talk about what happened on the battlefield. He didn't talk about the warrior he had killed. He didn't talk about the young Varath he had saved without thinking. He didn't talk about any of it. He just went back to his routine, morning drills, equipment checks, cafeteria food that tasted like regret, and tried very hard to feel normal again. It wasn't working. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw those burning, coal-black eyes staring at him from across the smoke. Every time he was about to fall asleep, he heard that sound, the deep, heavy thud of the warrior hitting the ground. It followed him everywhere. into the cafeteria, into the training yard, into the quiet, dark hours of the night when the base was silent and the gray Kepler-7 wind was howling outside like something alive. On the second night, Torres always noticed everything. "You need to stop thinking about it," Torres told him, sitting across from him in the empty cafeteria. "You did what you had to do. He would have killed you." "I know," Marcus said. "Then why do you look like someone died?" "Someone did die," Marcus said. Torres had no answer for that. They sat in silence for a long time. Outside, the wind kept howling. Inside, the lights buzzed faintly overhead. Marcus finished his coffee. It was cold. It had been cold for 20 minutes, but he hadn't noticed until now. He went to bed. He stared at the ceiling. He did not sleep. The morning of the third day started like every other morning on Kepler-7. Gray sky, cold air, wind that cut straight through.
The conference room inside Kepler-7 base was not built for moments like this. It was a small gray room with a metal table, 8 chairs, flickering overhead lights that maintenance had been promising to fix for 6 weeks, and a coffee machine in the corner that made sounds like it was in physical pain every time someone used it. It was the kind of room where soldiers got reassigned and equipment requests got denied, and nothing of any real importance had ever happened before. Until now. Colonel Hayes sat at the head of the table with 2 senior officers on either side of her. A Varath translator unit, a small black device the size of a fist that the military had been using for 2 years to communicate with Varath representatives, sat in the center of the table humming quietly. Vera Khan sat across from Hayes, her ceremonial armor filling the chair in a way that made the chair look small and slightly embarrassed about itself. The metallic scroll sat on the table between them like a third party in the conversation. Marcus sat at the far end of the table. Nobody had asked him to sit there. He had simply walked in, seen the chair at the very end, furthest from everyone else, and sat down in it with the specific energy of a person who was hoping that if he stayed very still and very quiet, the universe might forget he was in the room. It did not work. Hayes opened the conversation the way she opened every difficult conversation, directly and without ceremony. "Let me be very clear," Hayes said, folding her hands on the table. "Whatever this law states, whatever traditions exist within your civilization, Corporal Marcus Cole is a soldier of the United Earth military. He is not a piece of property, he is not subject to alien legal systems, and he is not going anywhere." Vera Khan listened to every word without expression. When Hayes finished, Vera Khan was quiet for a moment. Then she reached forward and placed one finger gently on the metallic scroll. "I understand your position," she said. Her voice through the translator was smooth and measured. "I want you to understand mine. Kael'mora is not a punishment. It is not a claim of ownership in the way your species understands ownership. It is a law built on honor, on recognition. Your soldier did not simply kill my mate. He killed the greatest warrior in Varath history in single honorable combat. By our law, that makes him extraordinary. Not a prisoner, not a slave, a life bond, the highest designation a non-Varath has ever been given in 10,000 years of our civilization." Hayes stared at her. "With respect, he does not want it." "With respect," Vera Khan replied quietly, "what he wants is not yet the point. What the law requires is the point." The 2 women looked at each other across the table in the particular silence of 2 immovable things that have just realized they are aimed directly at each other. Marcus cleared his throat. Everyone looked at him. He had not planned to speak. He had simply walked in, seen the chair at the very end, furthest from everyone else, and sat down in it with the specific energy of a person who was hoping that if he stayed very still and very quiet, the universe might forget he was in the room. It did not work. Hayes opened the conversation the way she opened every difficult conversation, directly and without ceremony. "Can I say something?" he asked. Hayes gestured for him to continue. Marcus looked at Vera Khan directly. Those silver eyes turned toward him, and he felt the same thing he had felt on the battlefield, that strange sensation of being seen completely, not evaluated, not assessed, just seen.
"I don't want to be disrespectful," Marcus said carefully. "I understand this law is important to your people. I understand it is old and it means something real to you. But I am a person. I have a life here. I have a unit. I have people who depend on me. I can't just belong to someone. That's not something I can agree to." Vera Khan studied him for a long moment. "You saved the young Varath soldier on the battlefield," she said. Marcus blinked. "What?" "The young Varath soldier who was surrounded. You broke cover. You ran toward the danger. You saved him before you killed Drax." She paused. "His name is Kale. He is 17 years old. He is my mate's youngest brother." The room went very quiet. Marcus had not known that. He had not known anything about the young soldier, not his name, not his age, not his connection to the warrior he had killed. He had just seen a teenager about to die and moved without thinking. "I didn't know who he was," Marcus said quietly. "I know," Vera Khan said. "That is exactly why I am here personally." The meeting ended 40 minutes later without resolution. Hayes told Vera Khan that the matter would need to be reviewed at a higher level, that Earth Command would need to be consulted before any decision could be made. Vera Khan accepted this with the patience of someone who had expected exactly this answer and had already decided how much time she was willing to give it. She stood, she picked up the metallic scroll and returned it to her armor. She looked around the small gray room one final time with an expression that suggested she found it both deeply humble and somehow appropriate for the occasion. Then she walked toward the door. She stopped just before leaving. She turned back to the table and reached into her armor again. She withdrew something small, a smooth black stone about the size of a coin, perfectly round, with a faint silver marking on one face that pulsed with the same bioluminescent light as the lines on her skin. She placed it gently on the table, not in front of Hayes, not in the center, directly in front of Marcus. "A Varath marker," she said. "It means I will return, and when I return, the conversation will need to go further than today." She looked at Marcus one final time. "Think about what I said, about Kale, about why I came personally. There is more happening here than a law, Corporal Cole. There is always more." Then she walked out. The door closed behind her. The room stayed silent for a long time. The coffee machine in the corner made its usual sound of mechanical suffering. One of the overhead lights flickered twice and went still. Marcus stared at the black stone sitting in front of him on the table. It was warm. He could feel the warmth of it from 6 inches away, a gentle, steady heat that had no business coming from a small piece of stone on a cold planet in the middle of nowhere. Hayes looked at him from the other end of the table. Her expression had shifted. The hard, professional certainty she had carried into the room was still there, but underneath it, something more complicated had appeared, something that looked almost like concern. "Cole," she said carefully, "is there anything you want to tell me about what happened on that battlefield? Anything you left out of your report?" Marcus thought about the young soldier, about Drax standing in the smoke protecting someone he loved, about the way those burning eyes had found his face in the chaos and held there for 3 full seconds before the end. "I didn't know who he was," he said quietly. "I know," Vera Khan said. "That is exactly why I am here personally." The meeting ended 40 minutes later without resolution. Hayes told Vera Khan that the matter would need to be reviewed at a higher level, that Earth Command would need to be consulted before any decision could be made. Vera Khan accepted this with the patience of someone who had expected exactly this answer, and had already decided how much time she was willing to give it. She stood, she picked up the metallic scroll and returned it to her armor. She looked around the small gray room one final time with an expression that suggested she found it both deeply humble and somehow appropriate for the occasion. Then she walked toward the door. She stopped just before leaving. She turned back to the table and reached into her armor again. She withdrew something small, a smooth black stone about the size of a coin, perfectly round, with a faint silver marking on one face that pulsed with the same bioluminescent light as the lines on her skin. She placed it gently on the table, not in front of Hayes, not in the center, directly in front of Marcus. "A Varath marker," she said. It means I will return, and when I return, the conversation will need to go further than today. She looked at Marcus one final time. Think about what I said, about Cale, about why I came personally. There is more happening here than a law, Corporal Cole. There is always more. Then she walked out. The door closed behind her. The room stayed silent for a long time. The coffee machine in the corner made its usual sound of mechanical suffering. One of the overhead lights flickered twice and went still. Marcus stared at the black stone sitting in front of him on the table. It was warm. He could feel the warmth of it from 6 inches away, a gentle, steady heat that had no business coming from a small piece of stone on a cold planet in the middle of nowhere. Hayes looked at him from the other end of the table. Her expression had shifted. The hard, professional certainty she had carried into the room was still there, but underneath it, something more complicated had appeared, something that looked almost like concern. "Cole," she said carefully, "is there anything you want to tell me about what happened on that battlefield? Anything you left out of your report?" Marcus thought about the young soldier, about Drax standing in the smoke protecting someone he loved, about the way those burning eyes had found his face in the chaos and held there for 3 full seconds before the end. "I didn't know who he was," Marcus said quietly. "I know," Veracon said. "That is exactly why I am here personally."
Morning came gray and cold, the way every morning came on Kepler 7. Marcus was already awake before the base alarm sounded at 0600. He had slept, actually slept, for the first time in 3 days, and woke up feeling something he could not immediately identify. It took him a few minutes lying on his bunk staring at the ceiling to figure out what it was. Clarity. Not answers. He did not have answers yet. But the fog that had been sitting inside his chest since the battlefield, that heavy, uncomfortable weight of something unresolved pressing against his ribs every waking hour, had shifted overnight into something cleaner, something that felt less like confusion and more like direction. He knew what he needed to do this morning. He got dressed. He picked up the black stone from the shelf and put it in his jacket pocket without thinking about it. The same way you pick up your keys before walking out the door, like it belonged there now, like it had always belonged there. He went to find Colonel Hayes. Hayes was in her office at 0630 the way she was every morning, sitting behind her desk with a real coffee that she had somehow been importing from Earth for 2 years at what Marcus could only assume was a deeply unreasonable personal expense, reading through overnight reports with the focused expression of someone who processed information the way engines process fuel, efficiently and without sentiment. Marcus knocked on the open door. Hayes looked up. She studied him for a moment, the way she always studied people, quickly and completely, and then gestured to the chair across from her desk. "I was wondering when you were going to show up," she said. Marcus sat down. "You were expecting me." "You had that look yesterday when you left the conference room," Hayes said. "The look people get when they've decided to do something they haven't fully talked themselves into yet." She set down her coffee. "So, talk." Marcus talked. He told her everything. He told her about the research terminal at 0200, about Dr. Okafor's paper, about what he had learned about Cale Mora and what it actually meant, not the surface version, not the threatening version, but the real version buried underneath 10,000 years of Verith history. He told her about the 11 warnings, about the rescue signal sitting in a military database marked unidentified for 2 years while the war it could have prevented kept running. Hayes listened to all of it without interrupting once. That was one of the things Marcus had always respected about her. She was one of the few commanding officers he had ever met who could listen to something genuinely surprising without her face doing anything at all. No reaction, no tells, just complete, focused attention. When he finished, she was quiet for a long moment. She picked up her coffee. She looked out the small window behind her desk at the gray Kepler 7 sky. "I know about the transmissions," Hayes said finally. Marcus stared at her. "You know?" "Not the details, not the 11 warnings specifically." She turned back to face him. "But I know the original incident was more complicated than the official record describes. I have known for about 8 months."
She paused. "I am not the only one who knows. There are people at Earth command level who have known longer than that." The room felt very still suddenly. "Then why is the war still happening?" Marcus asked. Hayes looked at him with an expression he had never seen on her face before. It was not the hard, professional certainty she wore like armor every day. It was something older and more tired, sitting underneath all of that. "Because wars," she said quietly, "are significantly easier to start than they are to stop, especially when stopping them requires someone to stand up and say publicly that the whole thing was built on a mistake." She picked up her coffee again. "That conversation involves people with considerably more rank than either of us." Marcus sat with that for a moment. "Is that why Vera Khan is here? Not just for the law, for the war?" Hayes looked at him steadily. "What do you think?" Marcus thought about Vera Khan sitting across that conference table, calm and patient and carrying something enormous behind those silver eyes. He thought about her choosing her words carefully, about her saying, "There is always more," like she was leaving a door open and waiting to see if he would walk through it. "I think," Marcus said slowly, "that she came here because she needs something to change, and she thinks I am somehow the way to change it." Hayes nodded once, very slightly, like she had been waiting for him to arrive at exactly that conclusion. "Then I suggest," Hayes said, "that you be very careful about what you decide to do next." Before Marcus could respond, the base alarm went off. Not the battle alarm, not the visitor protocol pulse from 2 days ago. Something else entirely. A sound Marcus had never heard before in 2 years of military service. 3 long ascending tones that rose and held and then cut off completely into silence. He looked at Hayes. Her expression had shifted into something sharp and immediate. "What is that alarm?" Marcus asked. Hayes was already standing up and reaching for her radio. "Diplomatic arrival protocol," she said, "reserved for heads of state and senior civilization representatives." She pressed the radio. "This is Hayes. Report." The response came back fast and slightly breathless from the soldier on gate duty. "Colonel, Vera Khan has returned to the outer gate, but she did not come alone this time. There are—" A pause, the sound of the soldier recalibrating. "There are 11 Varath vessels on the ridge, and standing with Vera Khan at the gate, there is a young Varath male, approximately 17 years old." Hayes and Marcus looked at each other across the desk. "Kale," Marcus said quietly. By the time Marcus and Hayes reached the outer gate, a crowd had already gathered. The 11 Varath vessels sat on the ridgeline above the base, like dark sculptures against the gray sky, long and angular and completely still, their surfaces absorbing the pale light without reflecting any of it back in. They were not armed, Marcus could tell that much even from this distance. Their weapon ports were closed. Their positioning was too exposed for an attack formation. They were there to be seen, to make a statement without making a threat. "We are here. We are serious, and we came in peace." Vera Khan stood at the outer gate exactly as she did 2 days ago. Same ceremonial armor, same absolute stillness, same silver eyes that found Marcus in the crowd immediately and held. Beside her stood Kale. He was smaller than Marcus had expected, leaner. His bone plating was lighter than Vera Khan's, younger, still developing, and one section along his left shoulder was visibly cracked and imperfectly healed from the battlefield 3 days ago. He stood straight despite the injury. His eyes were different from Vera Khan's, not silver, but deep amber, warm and alive, and they were fixed on Marcus with an expression that Marcus could not immediately identify. Not anger, not fear, something more complicated than either. Hayes stepped forward to the gate. "Vera Khan, this is an unexpected development." "I told you I would return," Vera Khan said simply, "and I told you the conversation would need to go further." She placed one hand gently on Kale's shoulder. "I brought Kale because he asked to come. He has something he wishes to say to Corporal Cole directly." Hayes looked at Marcus. Marcus stepped forward. He stopped at the gate and looked at Kale across the short distance between them. Up close, the young Varath looked even younger than he had seemed on the battlefield. There was something in his amber eyes, something raw and unguarded that Marcus recognized without being able to name it immediately. Cale looked at Marcus for a long, steady moment. Then he spoke. His voice was quiet and slightly uneven, like someone who had rehearsed something many times and was now discovering that the real version was harder than the rehearsed one. The translator unit on Hayes's belt converted the words into English with a slight delay. "You did not have to save me," Cale said. "You were the enemy. You had every reason to let me die, but you ran toward me anyway." He paused. His jaw tightened slightly. "My brother died protecting me that day, and you saved me before you killed him. I have been trying to understand that for 3 days. I cannot." He stopped. He looked at Marcus with those amber eyes. "So I came to ask you, why?" The crowd around Marcus was completely silent. The wind moved across the base in one long, slow wave. The 11 ships on the ridge sat motionless against the gray sky. Marcus looked at this 17-year-old alien boy who had lost his brother 3 days ago and was standing in the cold asking a question that had no clean answer. And Marcus told him the truth. "Because you looked scared," Marcus said quietly, "and I know what that feels like." Cale stared. Something moved through those amber eyes, fast and deep and impossible to fully read. His jaw worked silently for a moment. Then, slowly, carefully, like someone performing an action they had only read about and never done before, he extended his right hand toward Marcus. The human gesture of agreement, of connection. He had looked it up. He had learned it specifically for this moment. Marcus looked at the extended hand. He looked at Cale's face. Then he reached forward and took it. The crowd exhaled. Vera Khan watched from 2 steps back with those silver eyes and said nothing, but something in her expression, some small, carefully contained thing shifted into what I am almost certain was the Varith equivalent of relief. Behind her, the 11 ships on the ridge remained perfectly still against the gray sky, waiting. That night, the base felt different. Marcus could not explain it precisely. Nothing physically had changed. The walls were the same gray, the lights still flickered in the same hallways, the wind still pushed against the outside of the building in the same